We're very proud to launch the latest Digging Up Britain report. We have a really great mix of attendees on this call from all over the world, which is great to see. I think if I can ask Fian, if you can start sharing that first slide, Fian. It's an important slide, because at LS Bud we have a single mission, and that's to help anyone who might be putting a spade in the ground work safely. It's a simple but crucial message, and it is critical. Strike avoidance isn't a secondary thought or a byproduct of our service. It's something that is the primary purpose of what we do. Fian will look at the details of the report and give a taster of the results from this year. But one of the things that I always find amazing is that the number of new people using the service. Even during this pandemic year, we've been delighted that we've had over 31,000 new registrations, which equates to roughly 2,600 a month and 100 every working day, signing up to help them work safely. These people come from all over the country and in any industry. We always help anyone wanting to work safely, whatever size of project they're undertaking, whether it be HS2 or replacing the garden fence. But it goes without saying that the other key element are the asset owners and the networks that are protected by the service. And again, in 2020, we've been thrilled to welcome some new asset owners onto the service, a range of networks. And again, Fian will cover that in his section to cover who has joined, as well as some really encouraging results from their first 12 months of membership. And in the spirit of collaboration, we are really pleased to be supported in this by a selection of industry heavyweights, some of which you'll have seen on the quotes when you joined on the slides, as well as attendance, which is fantastic, by some industry experts that Bob will introduce later to share their thoughts. We really hope you find this interesting, find the content useful for your organisations, but please do provide thoughts and questions in the chat throughout. We will put a couple of polls up there just to gauge some thoughts. But as ever, we encourage the sharing of opinions and thoughts to share best practice. So that's enough from me. So over to you, Fian. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this lunchtime. My name's Fian Wardrop. I'm Business Development Manager with LS Bud, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Digging Up Britain 2021, planning for the digging boom. So I can scarcely believe that this is our fourth annual report, our fourth annual review of safe digging practices in the UK. And for those who haven't seen the report before, I'm not going to go through it sort of chapter by chapter. But I do want to give you a few highlights and really encourage you to download your own copy and have a look through it in more detail. So the kind of things that you'll find in it, we look at how many people search before they dig. We look at which industry sectors search the most, examine the kind of searches they're making. Importantly, we look at which areas of the UK we believe are most and least vulnerable to asset strikes. We examine the importance of making asset plan data available, and crucially, we report on the importance of reporting damages when they occur. A little bit on the data that forms the report. We draw on 4 key data sources. We draw on our own data. Last year we had more than 3 million searches, so it's a rich data resource right there. We also draw on data from the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, looking at electrical cable and gas pipeline strikes that were reported last year. We lean on some research from the Energy Networks Association, ENA, on safe digging practices in the construction sector. And we look at data from our friends at Utility Strike Avoidance Group, USAG, and their strike damages report. And a little bit more on each of those data sets. At LS Bud, we have more than 150,000 individual users now who contribute to those 3 million plus searches that we had in 2020. And when somebody wants asset plans from us, they can't get them until they answer some simple questions. So we know who's digging, we know when they're planning to dig, where they're digging, what type of work they're doing, and who they're working for. And we can use that data to draw conclusions, which is what we've done in Digging Up Britain. With the HSE's data, the reported accidents are those that might involve electricity cables, gas pipelines, cable damage, excavation incidents, and incidents that are reported under RIDDOR. The ENA did some great research last year, and amongst that looked at who's checking for assets before they dig, and indeed who isn't, and what are the reasons behind these decisions, and that's examined further in the report. And USAG collect data regularly, reported anonymously by those working in the industry on asset strikes that occur within their own organisation. So this data will show such things as the dates, times, working methods, and the seriousness of asset strikes. And I want to look a little bit more closely at that now, and this is one of the areas we examine in Digging Up Britain. The graph you can see on screen now comes from USAG and their data, and it shows the times and severity of incidents that occurred. So if we look, for example, at the red columns, which are the high severity incidents, we can see what time of day they took place at. And there are some pretty revealing spikes there, you know, at around lunchtime and also overnight and into the early hours. That kind of information is really helpful to a health and safety professional, particularly one who's trying to arm their team on the ground with, you know, sufficient information or breaks or snacks or whatever may be suitable to try and bring those numbers down. In terms of our own data, the 3 million searches that I mentioned take place against 95 LS-BUD members, and those you can see the logos for on screen. And these really encompass all sorts of utility sectors, from major players in electricity, gas and water, through to fibre companies, and some more unusual networks that people perhaps wouldn't think to search for when they're working. We have the fuel pipelines. We have things such as the onshore cables that connect to offshore wind farms. We have things like the district heating networks that run under many cities now. So all sorts of useful information. If I look more closely at new members, these are really interesting because there's a definite correlation when we welcome new members to LS-BUD. They often bring with them new users, and search numbers go up. So it's revealing to look at last year's new members. You can see there in the top of the screen, Frontier Power, Diamond Transmission and Blue Transmission. Now these three organisations are protecting through LS-BUD onshore cables that connect to offshore wind farms. Perhaps not obvious assets that people would search for, but really useful. We welcome several fibre companies. You can see Granta Backbone Network there, who run the fibre network for Cambridge University. Down towards the bottom, there's EU Networks, who we're finalising membership for at the moment. Jurassic Fibre, Box Broadband and Ninet. Ninet are up there in North Yorkshire. In the middle, we have National Grid and Cadent. Now, they were already members of LS-BUD, but we didn't have all of their assets. So users who were searching with us also had to go to those organisations to make a separate search. We're currently in the process of integrating all of those assets so that people can make one search through LS-BUD, which again will help users enormously, I'm sure. And lastly, I want to save a special word for Portsmouth Water. Portsmouth joined us in March 2020. And after 3 months membership, they were kind enough to give us the quote that you can see in the middle of the screen there. I'm not going to read that all out, but I do want to zoom in on one sentence that's in there, where they said that, importantly, in making our data more widely available, we're dramatically reducing the likelihood of asset strikes, helping everyone to work more safely and efficiently. Now that we would, obviously welcome that message, but it only really applies if it plays out in practice. So we were delighted that Portsmouth Water reported to us a couple of days ago that asset strikes across their region went down by 26% in the first year. And I really want to pay tribute to the people at Portsmouth for the way they've embraced this way of working and worked with us to drive this reduction, which is great news for them, but more importantly, great news for their customers as well, with a reduction in outages and such like. So knowing that making assets more widely available can help to reduce asset strikes, lets us have a look at these LS-BUD members by sector, and we've broken this down in the report. And what you can see on screen there are the gold areas there are the LS-BUD members, and the blue areas are the areas at the highest risk of strikes. So by sector, you can see with electricity and gas, we've got these pretty well covered, although not complete. We do have some irons in the fire, which are going to turn some of those blue areas gold, which is great and welcome. You'll also see perhaps a bit of a reverse of this on the water map, where we do have 5 members there, but an awful lot who aren't. And we're really working on this. I think traditionally water hasn't quite viewed asset strikes as seriously as electricity and gas, and perhaps for understandable reasons. But hopefully with the example that Portsmouth and others are setting, we can demonstrate to them that collaborating really is the right way forwards. And the other map there just shows some of the other networks that we have in LSBud. So you can there you can see things like the fuel pipelines that run, north to south and east to west and all over the country. There's the fibre networks. There are things like individual power stations. There are the district heating networks that I mentioned earlier. We haven't tried to put a blue sort of area onto that one because it's just so hard to know where everything else is. But we can report it pretty reliably for electricity, gas and water. So again, if you download the report, that we go into a bit more detail on each of those sectors. Looking at our own data, the depth of it is just growing and growing, and you can see there a graph on the left-hand side that shows how searches went through the 1 million mark back in 2013 and are now through the 3 million mark. So every year the depth of data grows. If we break it down and have a look at last year, you'll all remember what uncertain times we had at the start of last year. With the uncertainty around the pandemic that was sweeping the world, we certainly in February, March last year didn't know what would happen in terms of people working in the field, people using our service, just generally. We anticipated quite a dip, and you can see there was a dip in April during the first lockdown, but it wasn't nearly as substantial as we thought. And search figures bounced back really quickly. Which we were amazed at, and one of the big reasons for that, and one of the reasons we've described the report as planning for a digging boom, is that a great deal of the work that was done was planning, looking in advance, looking at sites in advance and readying them for work. And with the government's planned expansion in all sorts of infrastructure areas, we can see why that might be happening. Just to drill down into the numbers a little bit more, in terms of 2020, we were very surprised when we sort of analysed the figures at the end of the year that we set records for ourselves on all sorts of metrics. So we had the highest number of inquiries in a year, which the graph shows clearly. We had the highest number of inquiries we've ever had in a month in October, with more than 300,000 inquiries. We had the highest number of inquiries in a single week at the start of November last year, with nearly 80,000 inquiries. Perhaps unsurprisingly, during that week, we also had the highest number of inquiries in a single day, with more than 17,000 on the 3rd of November. I don't know why the 3rd of November was so significant, but that's the most inquiries we've had by a considerable margin. The last bit I'm going to have a look at here is just a look at who is doing the digging. So, and again, the report goes into more detail on this, but across the sectors that we have, whenever we've published the report, the highest digging sectors have been telecoms and water. This year's no exception. The bit that has surprised us is just how much the telecoms has jumped up by. There was a 24% increase in searches last year from telecoms, with more than 1.1 million LSBud searches attributed to that sector and their contractors. So we now know that more than a third of the searches we get are from the telecoms sector. Which is pretty remarkable in itself, but perhaps not that surprising given the ferocious rollout we've all seen of high quality fibre. The water sector, although I may have shown you a map earlier and sort of shown that they don't collaborate with us as well as we'd like them to as members, they certainly do as users. And again, a jump in the number of searches from water companies and their contractors of 6%, meaning more than a quarter of LSBud searches come from that sector, was pretty remarkable. There are several more sectors reported on in Digging Up Britain, but I wanted to pull out one in particular, which is the private individuals. And these are, as you can imagine, the hardest people to reach. This might be the person who's going to dig a pond in their garden or sink a fence post, and perhaps wouldn't even think to come to a service like LSBud and ask for asset location plans. In 2019, in Digging Up Britain, we said this was an area we were going to really target, and it's gratifying to see those search numbers growing. More than 125,000 searches came from private individuals last year. As you can, that probably is the tip of the iceberg. There's an lot more work to do here, but in terms of protecting assets and keeping people safe, it's a crucial area, and one that we're working really hard on. And the graph there in the bottom left-hand corner just sort of illustrates this. One of the things people have to do when they order our plans is tell us what kind of work they're doing. One of the categories there amongst many is domestic works, and we saw a real jump in this. And I think with people furloughed last year and working on, you know, home improvement projects, that probably to be expected. But again, nice that they're good that they're finding us, but certainly potential to do an awful lot more in that area. So that's really all I'm going to show you on Digging Up Britain. There are, you know, there's a great deal in the report. There are some robust conclusions, but I think if you want to read those, then I'd really encourage you to download the report. The report can be found. There's a link at the top of the page there. We'll pop that into the chat as well. We're also going to follow up with an email that'll include a link to that. So that'll take you through to our website. And when you get to our website, you'll see this page and that red button, and when you click on that, it'll download you a copy of Digging Up Britain 2021. And I really hope you'll go through and have a decent look at it. So that's all from me for now. There are more poll questions coming in the chat, and we're very happy to take any questions that you may have now or at the end of the session, as you prefer. So if anybody's got any burning questions, please do mention them.
Fian, there's one from Otter Musa in the chat asking about telecommunication, and I think that came in when you shared the visual on water, electricity, gas, and other.
Yeah.
So the question is, what about telecommunications? Are they at risk of strikes?
Yeah, that's a great question, Otter, and we put these the telecoms into that sort of other map that I showed there. And the reason we do that is, whilst we know where the member assets are that we have, knowing where the non-members are, it is just not so easy. So in the case of sort of electricity and gas, they'll have operating areas, but with the telecoms, it's far more widespread and far harder to pin down. So we know that some of the major telecoms, like Openreach and like Virgin Media, are sort of providing their own plans. So I think, you know, if they're not collaborating, then we know that the numbers are lower. The search numbers they'll be getting are lower. Whilst people would think to search for Openreach, we have done comparisons in the past that show they're at least 50% higher when people collaborate. So I would say yes, they are at a higher risk of strikes.
Okay, and can you see the chat now, Fian?
I can, Rich. Yeah. Have we got any more?
Yeah, Paul's just come in. Where do local authorities / highways sit as far as requests go?
It's twofold. We have a lot of obviously the local authorities and highways use our service regularly and routinely. We get an awful lot of inquiries from them. Where we would like to sort of do more with them is we only have a couple who are on as members protecting their assets, so we'd certainly like to do a lot more there, and that's an area we're very keen to push into.
Lovely. And there's another one there saying, why does the search function copy Cadent in, however not provide us with the maps? Will Cadent be joining LSBud properly?
That's a timely question. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mentioned Cadent on the new members, which seems a bit odd when they've been members for quite a while, but we've previously protected their medium and high pressure assets, but haven't had view of their low pressure assets. The ones that are at 2 bar and under. They have signed up now for us to provide those as well, which we're really pleased about. So that means once that's live, and we'd anticipate that being live later this year, then you'll be able to get all of those assets from one search, which hopefully will be a help for you.
Great. I think that's it in terms of the written questions. I think we've got a minute or two if anyone wants to unmute themselves and pop and ask a question directly. And we've also got the first poll going out, and we've had a good few responses to that. So that's the first question is asking, is there generally more awareness of damage prevention now than there was 5 years ago? Great. David, I can see you've got your hand up.
Hi, thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, what surprised me there in that asset strikes electricity in UK, maybe I picked it up wrong, but the focus of the blue seemed to be in southern Scotland, Merseyside, and down the northeast to Yorkshire. There was no blue in southern England, which, it seems strange that the report is only focusing on what I would call North England, southern Scotland, when we know from an ENA perspective there is a significant number of strikes down in the south. Where was the data? Where did the data come from that identified those blue areas?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dave. Perhaps I didn't explain it clearly enough when I went through those plans. The way we looked at it was that the orangey gold areas were the members of LSBUD, the existing members of LSBUD, and we've done analysis with existing and non-members to say, do they get more searches when they provide the plans directly to their users, or do they get more searches when they come through service like LSBUD? And they're getting massively higher numbers when they come through LSBUD. So what that means in practice is that more people are reviewing their plans before they go to site. So we would say for the blue areas, which are the areas that aren't members of LSBUD, so in the electricity example you gave there, there was Northern Power Grid and SP Energy, who of course we were working on. At the moment, they're getting a lot fewer strikes than they would be if they were through LSBUD. So we would say they have a higher risk of asset strikes because there's an awful lot of people digging who aren't reviewing their plans beforehand.
That's fine. That's clarified. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great stuff. So we've just launched a second poll. Those two polls will stay there in the chat for the next section. And so I'm just going to hand over to Bob Gallienne. Bob, are you happy to?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted I've got the opportunity to introduce three industry experts who are going to take us through three short sessions. And after that, I'll have a few words about possibly the future view and planning for a digging boom going forward over the next 5 to 10 years. So I'd like to start by introducing David Spillett. David is Head of Health, Safety and Environment for the Energy Networks Association. And David is going to provide us with a view from the ENA. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Bob, and officially good afternoon, everybody. Yes, as Bob says, I'm head of SHE here at ENA, so that's all electricity and gas distribution transmission operators and a number of associate members, Guernsey, Channel Islands, for example. So yeah. A good report. I haven't had the chance to really interrogate the report as yet. I will do that, hence one of the questions I asked there a few minutes ago. Probably need to read the report in full to understand it. But from an ENA perspective, I think from around about summer last year when we had the lockdown, I think was it the first lockdown starting to relax and people were starting to return to work. So all those who were furloughed, we saw a significant increase in cable strikes. Fortunately, there was no serious injuries, but a significant number, which kind of correlates with the graph that was shown a short while ago, around about the July period. And interestingly, it was domestics that we were seeing a lot more domestic strikes than we did in the traditional construction roadway type strikes. So we have a public safety committee at ENA whose role is obviously to oversee our strategy for protecting the public, and that group it has a budget for publicity and publicity campaigns that we lead through the ENA, and we did two last year. One was launched around the bank holiday, August bank holiday. It was fronted and starred Tommy Walsh. Some of you older people might remember Tommy from Ground Force in the early 80s, 90s. And Tommy fronted, and it was aimed primarily at domestic properties, particularly those who were either furloughed and thought, oh, we'll do a bit of DIY while here. And of course, those who maybe not in the construction industry thought they do spend some of their money where they couldn't spend on a holiday, for example. So they were doing some work in the garden. And we found that utility strikes, predominantly our members, gas and electricity, was occurring, and there was a significant increase. So we launched the video, the Tommy Walsh video. I'm hoping most, if not all, of you have seen that video. And that went down reasonably well. We launched that through all the social media platforms that we know of, and we got a lot of good feedback on that. Looking at the graph, the later figures in the graph that was in the report maybe correlates to some of the success of that. There was other things that were going on as well. And secondly, we actually did a second video, and that was aimed at I would say the traditional construction, roadway, footway, excavation work, to try to capture those as well, and that was launched later. And that was about an excavation just in the footpath alongside a property, where the person got some serious life-changing injuries, and it left a very short message. And hopefully, again, most of you have seen that second video as well. Again, launched through the social media platforms, shared through all of various trade associations and other sectors who would be interested in that activity. So from an ENA perspective, we are very proactive in trying through the public safety group to identify areas, particularly in this case excavation work, where we can try to reduce those numbers. And just to let you know, at the moment we are suffering from overhead line cable strikes. That's the one that's causing us some concerns at the moment, because when you do, 9 times out of 10, when somebody hits an 11 kV line, unless they get out the vehicle the correct way, if they don't, or if it's a direct contact with, the very latest one we had was a company, 2 young lads starting up a company, got a new piece of window washing equipment, 10 foot high, or 10 meter high actually it could have been, and putting it up in the garden, and they swung into a 33 kV line, and that person died immediately, and the second person received injuries as well. But we've seen tipper lorries and other vehicles, obviously construction related, where people are climbing down instead of jumping. They've climbed down and they've made the contact to earth. So at the moment for us, our focus is on overhead lines. Fortunately, and fingers crossed, the excavation type incidents seem to be reducing, but I can't remember a fatality involving a cable strike, but certainly with overhead lines, that's our focus at the moment. And you will probably see in the very near future a targeted video on the use of ladders and scaffolds alongside overhead lines. So that's one of the areas that we're focusing on. So instead of doing an annual big production 3-minute type video, we're going to focus on a number of smaller targeted videos, and this first one on scaffold and ladders use alongside overhead lines, similar to the Tommy Walsh DIY garden videos. That's what we're planning, and we've got an 18-month plan roadmap ahead, looking at some of our key risks and key areas that we want to ensure. Farming's being one, transport is the other, and as I said, excavation work, of course, that's is one of our daily concerns. So from an ENA perspective, we're not standing still. We support USAG, we support LSBUD. We're there to provide the support needed for those, particularly for those 2 organisations and those two groups. And I think my colleague Mike Lepard, who's on the call, is my lead in both of those areas. So I think I'll stop and pause there. I was primarily asked to talk a little bit about our strategy for public safety and our support, particularly for this report, of which we do, but personally I haven't had the chance to fully interrogate the report. So I'm going to pause there, and if there's any questions anybody has from an ENA perspective or anything I've said, then please ask.
David, do you want me to share that try sharing that video?
Absolutely. Sorry. I was just going to show an example of one of the videos that we did last year for maybe 1 or 2 who's on the call who haven't seen the video or the quality and the message behind the video. So yes, Bob, Richard, please.
I've been over it a million times.
Morning, sunshine. Nice of you to turn up on time for a change.
I was here before you were, mate.
not looking carefully at the plans.
It looks like the gas and the electrics run down the alleyway.
The cutting corners. The stupid rush to get the job done.
This is on the blink again. Don't matter. All the cables are down the alley. All the cables are down the alley.
You okay, son?
Thank you, David. That was a very thought-provoking video, and certainly one that brings home the importance of thinking before you dig and on planning before you get into any form of excavation. Really important, really strong message. Anything you want to finish off with, David, before we move on?
What I'll do is I'll share the link. I'll find the link for the other video that starred, as I said, starred Tommy Walsh, because that was focused on domestic properties and gardens. So I'll put that into the chat link.
Okay. Thank you very much for that indeed. I'd like to move on now. I'm very pleased to move on and welcome an ex-colleague of mine, Tom Ward. Tom is a solicitor who's been advising very successfully companies in the energy, utilities and communication sector on regulatory requirements, compliance, as well as defending civil and criminal cases. Tom's subject is, are sentencing guidelines having an impact? Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Bob, and good afternoon, everyone. Are sentencing guidelines having an impact? If we put it in the context of health and safety and environmental, and these are both areas in which asset strikes can feature, particularly health and safety, as that video evidenced. The general theme with sentencing is unfortunately on a significantly upward trajectory. Recent changes to sentencing guidelines have really encouraged courts to send a very clear signal to shareholders in companies. And the bigger the company, the bigger the signal to be sent. Anyone in the utility sector who's kept a general eye on the environmental side will have seen some of the truly eye-watering fines being handed down for environmental. Similarly, with health and safety, the fines are big, the fines are hefty. In both cases, for any company being prosecuted, being able to evidence that it did as much as possible to prevent the incident from arising is likely to be a key factor in both in terms of outcome and potential penalties. And looking at the data that Fionn put up, the thing that really struck me was that high severity incident timing data. I mean, in some respects, you would probably expect that work done in the middle of the night might carry a higher risk, but some of the other times of day were quite intriguing, and obviously definitely to be taken to note. If it's always like getting that post-lunch talking slot at any seminar or similar, where you know everyone's going to be asleep. Basically, do we know that we have times during the day when our guys might not be at their best, and can we deal with that? So the trajectory from a legal perspective, where things go wrong and the courts get involved, is unpleasantly upwards. That's in the criminal context. But the cost aspect is generally also quite interesting. I was looking at the University of Birmingham study in 2016 by Makana and Meche, talking about the costs of asset strikes. And I think they gave a 29-to-1 ratio for true costs, being £1 of direct cost equals £29 of true cost. That, I think, if you look at that in just the kind of general civil context, is one aspect. If you have an incident that gives rise to a criminal prosecution, and more commonly it's going to be probably health and safety related, the 29-to-1 ratio is probably just a drop in the ocean as to what the potential fines could be. So it's fascinating, because I remember years ago being told the best way to find any apparatus was to use a backhoe, said partly in jest. It looks as though the data is now considerably better than it was. And I think the long and short of it is better data actually feeding down to the people doing the works on the ground is going to result in better decisions, lower risks, and hopefully for you, less need of the services of my dear profession that I know everyone loves so much. So that it's really interesting to see that data, and I think, as David said, it'll be interesting to actually get in and actually have a look at the report in full. I think that's probably everything I'll say, Bob.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that. There will be the chance, obviously, to use the chat to ask questions, and I think there may be an opportunity at the end to maybe have 5 minutes to ask any other questions. I'd like to move on now. I'm very happy to welcome Steve Crossland. Steve is Chief Engineer Gas and Water for Balfour Beatty in the Power Transmission and Distribution section. Steve will put forward his thoughts on what we can do and what industry can do in order to resolve some of the situations. Over to you, Steve.
Wow, that's a big challenge, that, isn't it? Well, just to start off with, we know there is a lot of work going on out there, and certainly in 2020, with over 3 million LS-BUD searches being carried out and rising, I suspect that obviously that trend will continue. And certainly as a tier 1 contractor in the utilities markets, I hope that it does so. But what I'd like to do, Bob, actually, is to, from a USAG perspective, because I also represent Balfour Beatty on the steering committee of USAG, and I know there's a few USAG committee members already on this line as well. But specifically as well, related to which has been mentioned in the Digging Up Britain report, there is what we produce is the annual strike damages report, which has been referenced already as such, and on the working group for compiling and collating that relevant information. So from that perspective, and even Tom mentioned it as well there, that the more data that is provided allows better analysis of what is going on, which in turn enables a clearer picture as to what the issues really are, so that they can be highlighted, tackled and resolved. And I think that's key. Data is key on a lot of these issues. Certainly Balfour Beatty have already provided their strike data, as is already in for the 2020 results. So I ask all on the call to encourage those that are able to similarly submit your information if possible. I believe that the more formal request for this information will be issued shortly. So certainly by all means, keep your ears and eyes open for this. And just to reconfirm, I think Fiona mentioned it as well, that your submitted data is safe, it is confidential, and is certainly reviewed and is very, very useful. I believe that no one in the UK actually knows how many strikes actually occur in the year. Not the Geospatial Commission, not the HSE, not the USAG, nor any other body, to be honest. So the annual report that USAG produce is really important. It's one of the many reports that are out there, but I think is a really important one. It's informative and provides an insight as to how UK PLC is performing in terms of utility strikes. Are we improving? Are utility strike numbers coming down? It's a difficult perspective to fully comprehend, I suspect, to be honest, but certainly within my own company, strikes are reducing in numbers. From previously thousands per year, we're now down to hundreds per year. But they are still not at our target of zero. We've set ourselves a target of zero. That journey to zero cannot be done in isolation and involves relevant stakeholders, many of which are on the line today, to work together, share ideas, bring innovation to the table, trial new technology, improve the way we work, plus lots of other contributory factors. And by doing so, we will all benefit from such collaboration. And for those that wish a free copy of previous year's reports, then once again, you can download that from the USAG website. Whether or not you are a USAG member, you can access it and download it. And there's lots of relevant information that you can take out whatever you need to take out. There is no silver bullet to this. And finally for me, and it was shown in one of the slides which Fionn showed previously, which you may not have picked up, and I'm sure he referenced it, but one point to note, next month is July. And the relevance of that statement is that July is consistently the worst month of the year for utility strikes. July, okay? So every report we've produced from 2013 onwards has shown a spike next month for July. So with that in mind, please raise awareness to all relevant colleagues, stakeholders involved with or undertaking such work to take care, stay safe, and follow your training and company procedures. And certainly by all means, as a bare minimum, follow HSG 47. Because by doing that, I'm sure we'll minimise, reduce the number of strikes, minimise the severity, and hopefully save lives. So from that perspective, I've finished on that, Bob, if that's okay.
That's perfect, Steve. Thank you very much. Thank you for the clarity of that message. Really, really important. And also the other aspect of your messaging, which is let's all work together, collaborate, share and contribute, and in which case we'll all get better outcomes. And that's really, really important. So I'd like to thank all three of our presenters and thank them for their contribution. I'd just like to move on now, if I could, to maybe a little look to the future in terms of what's ahead of us. And the government's been very vocal, quite correctly, about building back better. And I'd like to add to that, building back safer as well, because that really is the purpose of why we're here today. The government has a Building Back Better policy paper released in March 2021, which followed on from the November 2020 National Infrastructure Strategy. And this is very much designed to move the UK into a full recovery following COVID-19, reap the benefits of Brexit, and improve the UK's productivity and growth moving forward. All of this is, and seen strongly by the government and experts, is underpinned by a commitment to redress our historic underinvestment in infrastructure. And that's looking at infrastructure in its broadest sense. As you can see, there's been mentioned a 600 billion investment of gross public monies over the next 5 years. Now, this is in addition to private investment to be made by privatised utilities and communication companies. The 600 billion covers roads, rail, hospitals, schools, power stations, all of which require additions and upgrades to existing underground infrastructure. So all will have an impact on the infrastructure and how we have to work on that. The government, in addition, has identified the following key areas which probably have a more direct impact on us: the 22 billion on HS2 over the next 5 years. That number is bound to rise. 1.3 billion on EV charging structure, electric vehicle charging structure, the acceleration to decarbonise our transport section. 5 billion to accelerate UK-wide gigabit broadband rollout. Currently, we're at about 33% of coverage. We're aiming to be at 85% by 2025. That's a significant amount of excavation and broadband implementation over that period. And in total, the level of private and government investment there is 30 billion. There's another 7 billion for National Home Building Fund to deliver up to 860,000 homes. All those 860,000 homes are going to be connected to networks of one kind or another, all of which are probably going to need upgrading and extending to do that. And just as an example of utilities, water companies alone will be investing about over 50 billion between 2020 and 2025. Can I have the next slide, please, Richard? So that's an unrivaled infrastructure investment. So how are we, the government's going to put more meat on this skeleton over the following 12 months, and we're going to have strategies on heating and buildings, industrial decarbonisation, transport decarbonisation, digital strategy, the net zero strategy. And all this is going to be underpinned by some procurement reform, which is all about actually trying to move as quickly as possible and as effectively and efficiently as possible. So the volume of work is going to grow very, very significantly. There'll be pressure to move forward quickly, and speed will be the essence. This could well result in higher risk to workers and assets, which further emphasises the need for safe digging. Can I have the next slide, please, Richard? Thank you. Yeah, so activity and volume of work will increase, as I've said, ambitious timescales, greater risks to assets. Those are the key takeaways from this. Another, I think, example that we need to talk about really is looking to net zero by 2050, virtually carbon free by 2050. So an expanded system to cope with electrification of transport, heating, again, required investment in network infrastructure. All of these will add together to increase the work on the existing infrastructure and extend it. It's going to be across the country. The levelling up policy will mean there'll be extensive work in areas outside the southeast of the country, and we need to be ready for this. It's going to have a big impact on our businesses. It's going to have a big impact on the resources we need, the skills we need, and the innovation required to make sure we can move at the speed that is going to be necessary. So whilst Digging Up Britain 2021 shows the volumes that we're working at currently, I think when we're looking at Digging Up Britain 2025, we're going to see very significant volume increases and very significant changes in how we work and the way in which we're working in order to achieve these ambitious targets. Okay, back to you, Richard.
Great, thank you, Bob. Really interesting insight there, Bob, on the future view, and I'm sure there's lots for everyone to take away there. I just thought we'd have a quick look. We're getting close to time. I was really pleased to see that everyone could handle the questions on the poll. Maybe it's clear we've got a very positive group, because 56% of people think England are going to get through to the next round. So nice to start with a bit of positivity. But getting on to the serious questions, I see some shaking of heads there. Generally, there is more awareness of damage prevention. So we had 85% of people think there's more, and I think it's quite hard to say that sort of neutrally, because we're all so involved in this. But it's a really strong vote that okay, there was 2% that said less, but 85% positive, 4% not sure, 7% the same, and 2% less. So that's really encouraging. The second poll, in terms of how that as how a team's performing and potentially as a result of that damage prevention effort, was even clearer, really, that no one thought it was worse. 72% thought better, 16% thought the same, and 11% just weren't sure. So some really, really positive things there. Just picking up on one of the questions, I don't think it's been answered there, from Mike Leopard, was, do you know how private individuals are hearing about your service and what routes are used to promote and raise awareness to help support the recent increase in requests? It's a really, really good question there, Mike. And from an industry engagement perspective on LS Bud, we've got, obviously there's a lot of searches coming from the utilities and their contractors, and if you speak to one person at a major contractor, that could influence tens of thousands of searches every year. If you speak to one domestic user, that might be one search in 5 years, but that could be the difference between them hurting themselves. So it's really hard to sort of represent the value of speaking to individual domestic customers. And we've got a number of different ideas. So we did some consumer research last year. We've got some more PR proposals this year to get to those people. They're the hardest people to get to, but they know the least about how to work around utilities safely. So it's an absolute core area, and that, you know, you can apply that sort of message to agricultural sector as well, and also the one-man bands. David, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it was just to add to that from an Energy Networks Association perspective. We've had some discussions at our senior director level SHE committee within ENA about the next price review period, which is 23 to 28, 5-year period for distribution network operators. And what we've already had some early talk about is TV advertising. Now, it doesn't come cheap, TV advertising, as you can imagine, but collectively and collaboratively through ENA, we're looking to seek some funding through that price period to try to launch, I suppose, a TV campaign that's obviously aimed at those who may not have social media, or indeed don't go on the likes of Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So that's in the plans as well, Richard. So that kind of, when it comes to that time, I think there might be some opportunity to work with the LBSUD as well to publicise, to be able to publicise that that organisation as well, and what that organisation can provide.
Brilliant. No, that's great, David. Very much, we're absolutely, the doors are open for how to collaborate. One of the things that our members benefit, because I think the second part of that question, I've lost it now, Mike, but was about how do we get people to the site, and one of those things is the asset owners all directing them to the same place, so that if someone's working in, say, the southeast, they don't need to go to UK Power Networks and SGN's different websites, they just go to one. And if we can get that easy message to people, and that's not just on the websites, but if they're going to county shows or they're doing industry engagement messages, if we can share each other's and support each other's, it doesn't have any impact in terms of costing. It just means that we just get a lot more industry penetration, which is fantastic. So I've just got some sort of closing out thoughts to make sure we don't run over time. We've heard today about the boom in searches during a year where many things stopped, at least temporarily. With the planned infrastructure boom starting and beginning to show now, things are continuing to develop at a rapid rate. Whatever your involvement in this area, it's likely that your approach is likely to need to change over the next even 3 to 5 years. It's a short-term impact. What impact that will have on your business is as yet unforeseen, but it's certainly hoped that understanding those drivers and monitoring their impact will help keep the asset owning networks safe and each other safe. So I just wanted to give a sincere thank you to all of you that have joined today, in particular to the excellent industry experts, David, Tom and Steve, whose thoughts have been much appreciated, help brings a lot of context to the data, as well as Fian and Bob for your hard work in putting this event on. Must also include a special mention to Energy PR, who have helped us with the report, taking all the data that we threw at them and help bring it alive in a document that I hope you'll enjoy when you download it. Making it understandable and relatable is a key thing into getting that industry engagement message right. So we'll leave you with the URL. We'll share the slides in due course, but certainly there's sort of three key things that whether you own assets or work around them, it's likely you're going to have to change the approach. Secondly, what impact do you think it will have on your business? And thirdly, what action can you or we take now? So just some thoughts really to summarise. Please do, as ever, get in touch with us. As I say, we'll share the slides with the marketing link on it, and the marketing email link. And just want to say thank you very much indeed. I think that's time up, and but I hope you found it as useful as we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Bye.
And team.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.